Pontiac was one of America's most iconic car brands until it died a lonely death, destined to be forgotten to the ages. How did the same company that built cars like the GTO and Firebird also give us the G6?
Today, we're going to explore the rise and fall of one of the most surprisingly bizarre auto manufacturers in recent memory and see if Pontiac really deserved its fate.
Welcome to Donut. The Pontiac Car Company was founded by General Motors all the way back in 1926. It was meant to be an affordable alternative to another GM company called Oakland. Slightly nicer and more powerful than Chevrolets, but not quite as nice or fancy as Oldsmobiles, Buicks, or Cadillacs. Fast forward to the 1940s and 50s, Pontiac is suffering with bland styling and boring engines. And because of this, Pontiac's reputation was trash. People thought that the brand made cars for grandmas. And I don't care if your grandma's cool and hot like Mary Steenburgen. Nobody wants to drive the same car as her. Something had to change. And luckily, the people wouldn't have to wait very long.
Inside Pontiac, Assistant Chief Engineer and eventual DeLorean creator John DeLorean had an idea. Along with Bill Collins and Russ Gee, the boys imagined high-performance versions of existing Pontiac models, targeted at a younger audience who love to drive like assholes. Cars like these were the perfect way to get around a racing ban imposed by GM bosses in 1963. The result was called the GTO.
The first generation GTO was available from 1963 to 1974 and was initially offered as an option package for the Pontiac Tempest. For a whopping $250, you got a 389 cubic inch V8 with a single 4-barrel carb, a 3-speed manual, and a Hurst shifter. You got upgraded springs and sway bars, you have wider wheels, and a pair of hood scoops. Hell yeah. The GTO was a big ol' rolling middle finger to GM's upper management and to Ferrari, whose own 1962 250 GTO for Gran Turismo Amalgamato was crushing racetracks all over the globe. I mean, they stole the name and put it on a streetcar. I doubt Mr. Ferrari was very amused.
No, I don't think he would be if he knew what Pontiac was. Do you think he knew what Pontiac was?
He probably didn't give a shit.
No. DeLorean, Collins, and Gee's idea was a gamble. If the GTO was a flop, they'd probably lose their jobs for sidestepping management and building the car in secret. Lucky for them, though, they were right to do it. GM expected to sell around 5,000 GTO packages in its first year, but Pontiac ended up selling closer to 33,000 units, proving that catering to assholes is always a sound business decision. This was the opening salvo in the muscle car wars, and the rest is history.
This is a second generation GTO, aka the Judge. It's got 366 horsepower, it's a street brawler. The scoops on the hood ram air through the quadrijet carburetor. It's got a dual plane intake manifold and a 400 cubic inch block. Pontiac slapped a 60-inch wide spoiler on the trunk to generate the downforce necessary to keep this beast planted to the road, but apparently it actually does the opposite. So apologies, Jimmy, if I spin out. The Judge is without a doubt one of Pontiac's most iconic cars, setting the tempo for the brand for the following decade. 3 more generations of GTO followed the first one, each one getting less cool looking and weaker in the engine department. The GTO died in 1974. It had a 350 cubic inch V8 under the hood. Sounds decent, but it made a very sad and asthmatic 200 horsepower. Luckily, Jimmy, this is not that car. Let's go for a drive.
Let's take her out, dude. Fire her up. Give it a minute. There you go. Go, 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 go. Oh,
That's full throttle.
That's full throttle? Old American muscle cars have a specific exhaust note that just is so menacing.
Yeah.
And I've come to love it.
The Judge, Jimmy. Here comes the Judge.
Why'd they call it the Judge again?
I think there's a show called Laugh-In Live. You had Sammy Davis Jr. who played this character, the Judge, and he would literally just say, "Here comes the Judge."
That's it.
Here comes the Judge. We have our own humor these days. Like, what if Chevy named the next Corvette the Corvette Rizzler? Like, that's the equivalent.
That'd be insane.
It didn't really age well, the name.
No.
At least the name's cool.
It's a cool name.
And I think it really fits this car. From the front, a very intimidating.
Yes. I mean, when you drive this car, you feel like a boss.
Dude, this is, as far as like a cruiser goes,
Yeah.
one of the coolest cars I think I've gotten to drive on the channel.
Cars of this era have so much character.
They really do. The performance, let's be honest, it's not exactly...
Not the best.
It's not blowing me away, but I don't care. Cars like this, they have their quirks. Once you're in tune with the car, and you know what it likes and you know what it wants, it's like you become
reminds me of the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland.
Please elaborate on
Well, you got a lap belt, and also the steering feels so like it's very loose. Like you can just steer it with one hand. You're running away from the bad guys in this.
Driving this really reaffirms my desire to own a car.
Yeah, I'll be honest, you fit this car so well.
And you know what? It's the nicest thing anyone's ever said.
You look so good. So how do you follow that up? The Firebird was initially imagined as an elevated Camaro. It had slightly different styling, a nice interior, and some decent engine options. However, it wasn't until the Trans Am debuted in 1969 that things really took off.
The Firebird's development kept pace with the Camaro and generally didn't make a ton of waves until 1977, when a hillbilly trucker and a smooth-talking dreamboat with a black Trans Am took America by storm in a little movie called Smokey and the Bandit. If you're 19 years old and haven't seen this movie, go check it out, it's actually really good. This movie about an illegal beer run made the Firebird the legend that it is today. It's a car that spawned hundreds of thousands of ill-conceived mustaches and possibly even more Gen Xers. The second gen Firebird existed from 1970 to 1981, and had engines ranging from a 3.8 liter V6 to a 7.5 liter V8. There's even a turboed V8 version, but it was terrible and only made 210 horsepower. The most powerful second gen Firebird was the manual transmission equipped LS1, not to be confused with that LS1, which made 370 horsepower, but that lowly V6 model I mentioned earlier only made 105. Yikes.
After Smokey and the Bandit came out, sales of Trans Ams nearly doubled. It was a sign that while GTO had set the pace for the brand, Firebird set the pace for pop culture. Pontiac blessed the world with a screaming chicken, and they were cooking with gas. Kinda like my favorite fried chicken spot, Raising Cane's. Yeah, it's the best, okay? Fight me in the comments.
After decades of building legit pop culture credibility, Pontiac was feeling itself. When I feel a burst of confidence, I might do something a little risky, like trying out a new look. And like my decision to wear a fedora to my buddy's wedding when I was 21, those risks can have disastrous consequences.
Pontiac decided to pursue a new kind of vehicle for the 80s, a real mid-engine American sports car that could keep up with Europe and Japan. It defined a totally new way of building cars. The Fiero went from a clean sheet design to a running prototype in only 6 months, and it did so on a shoestring budget of only $400 million. That's a lot of Costco hot dogs, but when you're building a car, it's not a lot. The idea was to have a super fuel-efficient commuter vehicle that could stick it to the Japanese manufacturers that had been eating GM's lunch. Unfortunately, GM decided to pair the Fiero's sports car look and layout with a heavy and underpowered Iron Duke inline 4-cylinder engine, which made a measly 92 horsepower. This is the same engine found in mail trucks still used by the USPS. And look, hindsight is 20/20 when you're building a car. Detroit was still figuring out how to make a fuel-efficient and peppy 4-banger at the time, but it doesn't take a business psychic to predict how this was gonna work out.
Given the rush development and new construction methods involved in the Fiero, it underwent some teething problems in its first few years of production, to say the least. The biggest of which was the Fiero's tendency to catch on fire. This had to do with the Iron Duke's poorly made connecting rods letting go, punching a hole in the engine block, and spraying oil on hot engine compartments. Unsurprisingly, the Fiero was discontinued due to low sales after the 1988 model year. RIP.
And guess what, y'all? The blunders wouldn't stop. Less than 10 years later, Japanese crossovers like the Toyota RAV4 and the Honda CR-V were the hottest thing on the car market in the late 90s. GM, they had no answer. They had their pants around their ankles. Pontiac, they needed something fast. Apparently, they didn't learn anything from the Fiero, and they rushed the development timeline for their project. Way too many people gave input on this new car, dubbed Project Bear Claw. It was officially renamed the Aztec and hit the market in 2000. The Aztec was more or less a marketing ploy, capitalizing on the trend for everything to be extreme, and therefore separate Gen Xers from their boomers' parents' money. Didn't really work. They only sold 119,000 units over its lifespan, mostly because the Aztec was butt ugly. Pontiac didn't even break even with the production on this car. This car broke bad.
The Aztec was a monumental failure and probably would have been sent to the trash bin of car history if not for Breaking Bad, and now that I think about it, GM probably would have preferred that we forget about it anyway. If you want to really nerd out about the Aztec, we did an entire episode about it on our history podcast, Past Gas. You can go check that out. You have a link down in the description.
After the complete bungling of brand image that was the Aztec, Pontiac was in a bit of a flat spin. Most of their lineup was rebadged GM products, which ironically mirrored the company's struggle in the 1950s. Also ironically, Pontiac decided the best way to remedy this was to bring back the GTO. But this time, it wouldn't be a Pontiac at all. The 5th gen GTO was an Australian market Holden Monaro, retooled for US roads. It was available from 2004 to 2006 with a 350 horsepower LS1 and then a 400 horsepower LS2 in 2005 and 2006. Unfortunately, because the 5th gen GTO didn't look like an old muscle car and instead looked like a rental car, people didn't buy them in numbers that GM had hoped for. Initial targets of around 18,000 units per year proved to be pipe dreams, and GM was forced to execute it on the spot.
Amazingly, GM let Pontiac try again. In came the G8. While the GTO has a hell of a lot more name recognition, the G8 was arguably a much better car in nearly every way. Like the 5th gen GTO, the G8 hailed from the land of drop bears and Vegemite as well. This time, it was based on the Holden Commodore. The GXP was the G8's top trim, and it came exclusively with the unassailably awesome 415 horsepower LS3 V8. You could get it with a 6-speed Tremec manual transmission or either a 5 or 6-speed automatic. It had big ol' Brembo brakes and a Nürburgring tuned suspension. This thing was mean and fast and better than we deserved from Pontiac at the time. And as far as death rattles go, it's a pretty good one. But again, it didn't really sell. Pontiac only built 1,829 examples, so finding one today that hasn't done a rollback burnout into a crowd of teenagers at a takeover isn't exactly easy or cheap.
And that brings us to Far East Movement's favorite car, the G6. I thought it would be bigger. The G6's biggest claim to fame is that Oprah gave away 276 of them to the audience members during her show. This was done as part of a $110 million marketing push, and what seemed like an amazing bit of good fortune for those lucky Oprah fans quickly turned into the automotive equivalent of, here, this is your problem now. As in, they had to pay taxes on their brand new surprise car. I think I would have rather taken the fridge. The G6 was based on GM's Epsilon platform, which was shared by the Malibu, the Saturn Aura, and an extremely modified form of the Saab 9-3. It was available as a 2-door coupe, a 4-door sedan, and even as a convertible. You ready to drive this thing, Nolan?
Oh, I can't wait.
Hop in, buddy. Oh yeah, dude.
Go ahead and goose it, Jimmy.
Interesting.
Okay. Not what I was expecting.
No. Front wheel drive, V6, 3.9 liter.
3.9, that's a...
It's a big V6.
That's a big V6.
For a front wheel drive car. I'm pleasantly surprised.
I'm very pleasantly surprised right now. The owner, we were talking to him, he said, you know, he moved over here to the US. He was looking for a car. He wanted a Prelude, a Honda Prelude. Another longer wheelbase.
Front wheel drive.
2-door coupe. And what he found is that Preludes are pretty expensive these days, especially nice ones. So he started looking around at other things. He didn't even know this car existed.
Yeah, he said he stumbled upon it.
Stumbled upon the G6, and when he got it,
He got the bug.
He got the bug, and you know what? He's lowered it on coilovers.
Yeah, some nice SSR wheels too.
Yeah.
Big fan of those.
And honestly,
It looks great.
it looks good for like a G6.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks good. There are some interesting things about it though. The super long wheelbase, I think it hides it pretty well because the overhangs are pretty short. But when you pointed out the space between the end of the door and the rear wheel,
It's
like
crazy.
The back seat is massive.
Acceleration is there.
It is.
I mean, the braking, I would say, is a little interesting just because it is a heavy engine. You can feel the weight.
We got a chime for something.
Dude, oh yeah.
Is that temperature?
That's temp. I'm gonna pull off to the side right
like
here.
Yeah, sure.
It's this hose right here. It just popped off, it looks like. GM 2006. Nice. Despite being bland and slow, GM managed to sell over 650,000 of them during its 6-year production run. But that wasn't enough to save Pontiac. the G6 would be the last Pontiac to roll off the assembly line and into retirement at the Pontiac Museum in Michigan.
Ultimately, General Motors' decision to kill off Pontiac came down to cold hard cash. The world was in a bad place during the great financial collapse of 2009, and of the big three, Ford was the only American manufacturer to not take a bailout. In an act of penance for its previous business sins, General Motors offered to kill both Pontiac and another underperforming brand, Hummer, if the US government would give it $25 billion. Uncle Sam said deal and bailed them out. Pontiac was dead. So, did it deserve it? If anything, the brand's demise shouldn't have ever been a surprise. Pontiac's fate was entirely caused by chronic mismanagement for more than 30 years. In retrospect, I think it's amazing Pontiac lasted as long as it did. They made some really great cars. I mean, I want to buy this.
Amazing car.
But they were also forced to make a lot of bad ones too. And the people who poured their souls into the company ultimately paid the price. So, if you want to learn about another great car company that fell off, check out this video on Mitsubishi. Huge shout out to Rye for letting us drive his G6. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you to EAD Motorsports for letting us use their space. Thank you guys for watching everything here on Donut. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you guys in the next one. You gonna drive this home?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Dude, enjoy it. You fit it too well.